So, I am a pretty light sleeper. I don't when Becky and I go to bed at night, and I think our kids have figured this out. Between the two of us, I am the light sleeper. In fact, I think my kids know this so well that they always come to my side of the bed. And I freak out. Like, all of a sudden, I wake up and there's a face right there. I'm like, hey. Oh, it's you. And you know what? This really was, it really came to my attention that I had this issue when Becky was pregnant with our daughter, Lily. Every night when we would go to bed, I was so worried. I don't know where this anxiety came from, that I was worried that Becky would roll out of the bed and fall out of the bed, right? I just thought that maybe that was something that might happen. And so every time that Becky would breathe strange or just move even slightly, I'd grab her like this. And if you know Becky, you know how well that went, right? She's like, "Would you stop it? Get away from me," right? She would get really mad at me, actually. Especially like after the 20th time that I did it. But I have to be really relaxed to get a good sleep. I have to be really tired to get a good sleep so that I go into a deep sleep. I have to be at a place where I've discovered that I have to even trust that my surroundings are okay and everything is going to be okay and that the house is okay and everybody is where they're supposed to be and everything is where it's supposed to be and I trust that everything is going to be fine, and then I can relax and for whatever period of time get some kind of sleep. But it's interesting to me, I believe that as a whole, our society is exhausted. Even to the point that I'm not sure that we are aware of it, that we realize it. And at times I think we don't even have time to acknowledge it. I've often heard experts and leaders tell me, and others say, they tell me to take time away, to go and find time to rest, to put the phone down, right? To get away from the computer, to get away from the emails. And they would tell me, it can handle itself for a few days. Anybody ever been told that? That just get away from all the busyness and everything going on, that it can take care of itself for a few days, to get away from it, to pause and to be quiet. The world does just keep going. And sometimes it's hard for us to get away. It's hard for us to get away because I think we tell ourselves how much the world needs us, how much, for me, the church needs me, how much my business needs me, some of us might say, or how much this or that needs me. But I wonder if it's less about whether we think the world needs us in order to keep functioning, or the fear that we might realize that it really doesn't need us. See, I have a buddy who is a doctor, and he and I have a lot of conversations together and talk together about our different careers and career paths. And so he and I have talked about how in his world, because he has such a stressful job and where life or death decisions that he makes all the time and surgeries, and it's really easy for him, if he's not careful, for him to think that the world around him revolves around him. That everywhere he goes, that people are dependent on him, and he even can find himself getting into a mindset where that becomes normal. In fact, there is an actual term that they use for that kind of mindset. It's called the God complex. And I'm so thankful for him. He's one of the most grounded people that I know, that he does not allow himself to get like that, and that he does different things to make sure that he doesn't fall into that trap of having a God complex. But even in my career, even in the things that I do here as a pastor and the work that I do, there's a thing called the Messiah complex. And we're warned about this as we study for ministry and as we go through the process of becoming a pastor, to be careful and to watch out for the Messiah complex. Because in our field that runs similar to a counselor, we have people that want to see us and talk to us and share with us their needs. And we can find ourselves in the midst of some deeply painful situations that people are going through in their lives. And we want to be there. I want to be there for people. I feel a call to be there for people, to walk with people in their lives, to walk with you as your pastor. I want to be there with you. But if I'm not careful, both because of the neediness of people and my neediness to be needed, say that 5 times fast, it can turn into what's called a Messiah complex. And I had to determine a very long time ago, and I have to keep this in front of me, that though I long to be like Jesus, and I know this will be a surprise to a lot of you, even though I long to be like Jesus, I'm not Jesus. All right? There really is a limit to what I can do, and somewhere I have to trust the work of God in people's lives. I cannot make people choose to make better choices for themselves. I cannot heal every wound. I cannot carry every single person's burdens. And there's a fine line between being a reminder of the presence of God and thinking that it all depends on me. It's a heavy load to carry when you think the world is on your shoulders. And I've been there. I know what that feels like to think that it all depends on me. And for myself and my friend who's a doctor, we have to always be on guard that we are not guided by our fear of not being needed. See, there is nothing quite like coming to grips with the fear of being insignificant. I think our world, our culture, a lot of us grapple with this fear of being insignificant. And when we are driven by any kind of fear, it will eventually exhaust us and destroy us from the inside out. This series on anxiety has been challenging. It's been challenging because it hits home for all of us. As we prepare for the holiday season, you can almost feel the anxiety rising, right? The traffic increases. Believe it or not, it actually can increase around here. The thoughts of getting gifts for everyone. It's funny, my wife, Becky, she is such a gift giver, and she loves to get gifts for everybody, and she will make a list of all the people in our family that she needs to get a gift for, and it is stressful for her because she's wanting to make sure she gets a gift for everyone. It's so stressful for her, and then it is stressful for me because I'm trying to figure out how we're going to pay for all the gifts that we're getting for everyone. See how that vicious cycle goes? But my hope for this series is that we would have some practical ways as followers of Jesus so that we can have the help we need to not only face the anxiety in our own lives, but also help those around us and the world around us where it's very real for them. We've talked over the last few weeks that we need to remember our identity, right? That we need to remember not only who we are, but whose we are. That we need to have our priorities in check, our lives, and to put practices in place that help us remember, right? We put our faith in first place and put our relationships in second. That we are connected to each other. We need each other. We talked about that last week. That we have been wired with a need to be connected. And do you know why God wired us like that? He did it because since we are made in His image, right? The image of God, we are healthy when we are in connected relationships with each other that honor His presence in our lives. When we have that, guess what happens? we are reminded of his presence in our lives through each other. All of us, when we are together, when we are in this faith walk together, when we are listening for God and following God and giving our lives to God together, we remind each other of his presence. As we wrap up this series on anxiety and how we can cope and even experience hope in the midst of it, I want us to focus on one last tool, one last piece here for this week. There's many more, but we're going to focus on this one. That we need to recognize we have and how it can be used in the greatest potential possible. So we've stated, anxiety is about perception, right? Remember we talked about this? Oftentimes our minds perceive the worst possible outcomes about whatever might happen, and it runs wild. Your mind ever run wild with what you think might happen and might go wrong? The worst possible outcomes? In fact, there's a phrase that probably a lot of us are familiar with. Don't borrow trouble. You ever heard that? Or we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. Because here's the deal. At the end of the day, I have found that even if the worst possible outcome happens, what good does it do us to be paralyzed by our assumptions before we know the facts? What good does it do us? The followers of Jesus, there was this point in the time when they were about to enter into a really, really anxious season of their lives. It was toward the end of Jesus' time with them, and so he was trying to get them ready for what was about to happen. He was about to go to the cross, and they were about to enter a season where they were going to feel like they were alone, and they were abandoned. And so Jesus was trying to get them ready, and in the book of John, chapter 14, he gives them this really, really famous speech, this famous talk, message. Listen to what he says in 14, 1 through 4. Don't let your hearts be troubled. Trust in God and trust also in me. There is more than enough room in my Father's home. If this were not so, would I have told you that I am going to prepare a place for you? When everything is ready, I will come and get you so that you will always be with me where I am, and you know the way to where I am. You gotta love Thomas. He says, no, we don't know, Lord. We have no idea where you are going. So how can we know the way? Listen to what Jesus says to him. I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one can come to the Father except through me. If you had really known me, you would know who my Father is. From now on, you do know him and have seen him. And Philip says, Lord, show us the Father, and we will be satisfied. Jesus replied, have I been with you all this time, Philip, and yet you still don't know who I am? Anyone who has seen me has seen the Father. So why are you asking me to show him to you? Don't you believe that I am in the Father and the Father is in me? The words I speak are not my own, but my Father who lives in me does his work through me. Jesus says, just believe that I am in the Father and the Father is in me. Or at least believe because of the work you have seen me do. I tell you the truth, anyone who believes in me will do the same works I have done, and even greater works, because I am going to be with the Father. You can ask for anything in my name, and I will do it so that the Son, the whole point of it, can bring glory to the Father. Yes, ask me for anything in my name, and I will do it. It's interesting. Jesus talks about a troubled heart, right? And a troubled heart really struck a chord with me this week. There are a lot of us in this room, there are a lot of us watching online who are experiencing troubled hearts. We are troubled about the holidays coming up. We are troubled about our jobs. We are troubled about our families. We are troubled about sickness. We are troubled for someone else who is having trouble. We are troubled about the unsettledness in our culture and our world. We are troubled about getting old. We are troubled about our medicines. We are troubled about our future. So let me tell you something. It's okay. Obviously, Jesus knew that we would have troubled hearts. But here's what happens. Jesus gives us the best weapon we have to battle through our anxiety. He tells us to what? Trust. Jesus tells his disciples, I know you are going to worry. I know you are going to be afraid. I know it's going to look and feel like I have abandoned you, but when those feelings come and it looks like you are losing, when it feels like it's all coming crashing down around you, this is what Jesus says, trust. Trust that God has not forgotten you. Trust that I have not forgotten you. Trust that I'm coming back for you. Trust that I will never leave you. Trust that I have a better future for you. See, Jesus knows that when he does eventually go down, when he does eventually go to the cross, he's going to look like every other revolutionary leader. See, this is what the Pharisees were afraid of. That Jesus was going to be just like every other revolutionary leader who would come and would die because they would try to stand up against the Roman Empire. This is what they've always thought, right? They believed this was their past understandings of what God wanted to do in their world. That unless God showed up with the power of violence and massive military might behind him, even God was no match for the Roman Empire. They could not see that when you fight violence with violence, do you know what you ultimately get when you fight violence with violence? What else do you get? You get violence. Jesus knew this. This is what they'd always known. And basically because they knew they didn't have the military might, then nothing was ever going to really change. But Jesus challenged his followers to trust him for something more. And Jesus challenges us to trust our future to him. Trust that he will pull us into himself. When we trust our future to Jesus, he offers us a chance to break free from the power of our past. And that's why he paid the price of his life, so he can draw our lives to him. Our past does not have to have power over us because of what Jesus did. His past and the past that they thought was going to repeat itself in Jesus did not, because Jesus came back to life. It was not the end. You see, we do not have to be victims of our anxiousness. We do not have to be victims of our anxiousness. Jesus knew the disciples would be drained of their hope and exhausted from the trauma. He knew they were about to enter a time when they would face a choice to run away, self-implode, or hang on through their trust in him. There's a story in the Old Testament about a prophet, a preacher man, who also experienced exhaustion. His name is Elijah. Elijah is a cool dude. Man, he brings it. There's this. He calls the people of Israel, he calls them out on their worship of false gods, and he even calls out the power structure of the day, King Ahab and Queen Jezebel. And he has this incredible epic moment where he and God put together this plan, and God shows up in this incredible way and embarrasses all these other false prophets and preachers. And guess what? King Ahab and Queen Jezebel are not happy that he's messed up their whole plan. And so Queen Jezebel hatches a plan that she's going to kill Elijah. And after Elijah's had this big moment where God shows up in this incredible way, now he's on the run. Here's what happens in 1 Kings 19. So Jezebel sent this message to Elijah. May the gods strike me and even kill me if by this time tomorrow I have not killed you just as you killed them, because he took the lives of those other prophets, the false ones. Elijah was afraid and fled for his life. He went to Beersheba, a town in Judah, and he left his servant there. Then he went on alone into the wilderness, traveling all day. He sat down under a solitary broom tree and prayed that he might die. Listen to what he says. I have had enough, Lord. Take my life, for I am no better than my ancestors who have already died. Did you hear him? Man, Elijah told him, I've had enough. I mean, he's poured everything he has into saving his people. He is exhausted. He is drained of his hope. And up to this point, I'm going to go out on a limb and say that Elijah probably hasn't taken very good care of himself. Yes, he's had very important work to do, but he's allowed himself to get into a rough spot. So Elijah lays down and he goes to sleep, and then God sends an angel who comes and wakes him up, and then they travel together for 40 days and 40 nights, and eventually he gets to this mountain, and Mount Sinai is what it's called, and he goes into a cave where he falls asleep again. And we're going to pick it up to what happens next in this cave, starting in verse 10. But the Lord said to him, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" Elijah replied, I have zealously served the Lord God Almighty, but the people of Israel have broken their covenant with you, torn down their altars, and killed every one of your prophets. I am the only one left, and now they are trying to kill me too. Go out and stand before me on the mountain, the Lord told him. And Elijah stood there. The Lord passed by, and a mighty windstorm hit the mountain. It was such a terrible blast that the rocks were torn loose, but the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, there was an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, there was a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, there was the sound of a gentle whisper. And when Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his cloak and went out and stood at the entrance of the cave. And the voice said, What are you doing here, Elijah? He replied again, I have zealously served the Lord God Almighty, but the people of Israel have broken their covenant with you, torn down your altars, killed every one of your prophets. I am the only one left, and now they are trying to kill me too. Then the Lord told him, Go back the same way you came and travel to the wilderness of Damascus. When you arrive there, anoint Hazael to be king of Aram. Then anoint Jehu, grandson of Nimshi, to be king of Israel. And anoint Elisha, son of Shaphat, from the town of Abel-Meholah, to replace you as prophet. Anyone who escapes from Hazael will be killed by Jehu, and those who escape Jehu will be killed by Elisha. Now listen, verse 18 is really, really important. Yet I will preserve 7,000 others in Israel who have never bowed down to Baal or kissed him. See, Elijah's exhaustion leads him to believe the lie his anxiety is telling him about his circumstances. His exhaustion is fertile ground for his anxiety. His exhaustion causes his mind to be fogged, and it seems like he forgets everything. I mean, Elijah, look what God just did. But he forgot that. Look at the reason you're even exhausted, Elijah. How could you say that God is not with you? But he was in a place where he wasn't trusting God. See, Elijah's exhaustion, or could it be that he created a life-giving pattern meant to help us never forget where the source of life actually comes from? When we know who has our best intention at heart, when we pause and rest and allow our souls to be fed through rest, we can be reminded not only of who we can trust, not only who we can trust, but why we can trust God. We can trust him because we know he created us because he loves us. We can find rest in our trust of this love that God has for us. That the reason he wants us to carve out space for rest in our lives is because he loves us. God created space for rest so that we could live life to the fullest. Without rest, without creating space in our lives for rest, the power of anxiety is too great. It's easy to think that there's no hope. It's easy to think that the chaos and the anxiousness will overwhelm us. But I believe that God has given us a pattern for how to live life abundantly. There's a lot of anxiousness in our world. There's a lot of fear. But I hope that today, as you walk out of this place, you will be encouraged to trust the one who loves you, to trust the God who created you and put breath in you. Trust him so much that you carve out time to rest. That you really do know that the world will be okay if you unplug for an hour, for a day. Your family, your friends, your coworkers, they need you to rest. They need you to have a healthy, growing relationship with God. Let's stand together. I'm going to ask you to bow your heads, close your eyes just for a few moments. 3 questions I want to ask you this morning. Do you trust God with your life? Like, really, do you trust him? Not just playing church and playing games, but really trust him. Maybe today you don't know Jesus and you want to. Maybe today you hear the voice of God inviting you to trust him. Would you do that today? Trust him with your life. Trust him with your current time, and trust him with your future. Trust him with your past. Give it to him. Let him set you free from it. Do you trust him to be in the fire with you? That when you step out of this place and you face whatever it is that might be causing chaos in your life, do you trust that he's right there with you? And finally, for all of us, are we spreading the peace of Jesus everywhere we go? This week, when you sit around the table with your relatives and somebody wants to start talking about politics or all that chaos, will you be the peace of Jesus there in that moment?
Hey, thanks so much for being a part of our gathering today. I hope you've sensed and felt God speaking in your life. Maybe it was something that we sang, maybe it was something that you heard through Scripture, or something we talked about. But we'd like to offer you ways to take next steps in your faith. And we want to be able to come alongside of you and help you as you grow. Or if you have any need in your life that you'd like for us to pray with you about, we'd love that chance too as well. So if you're watching on Facebook, there's areas down below here that you can actually comment along on our Facebook live feed, or you can actually message us through Facebook as well, and we'll respond to you, get back to you, and come alongside of you. If you're watching online through our website, you can email us, and you can do this anytime, but you can email us at nextsteps@pineville.church. We love the chance to come alongside of you and help you in any way that we can. So I hope you have a great week. Thanks so much for being a part of our gathering. Thanks for being a part of Pineville Church.